When my daughter-in-law told me to leave, I smiled instead of crying. Not because I was strong, but because my tears had already dried long ago. It's strange how pain can reach a point where it becomes quiet. You don't scream anymore. You just sit there, listening to your heart break one small piece at a time. I never thought those words would come from someone my own son loved so deeply. And I never imagined that love could one day draw a line between us. But life has its own way of teaching lessons you never ask for. My name is Amina. Most people just call me Ummi. I am a simple woman who once believed that love and sacrifice could keep a family together. I raised my only son, Hassan, after his father passed away when he was just 8 years old. Those were hard years, but they were filled with love. I stitched clothes for the neighbors, cooked simple meals, and made sure Hassan never went to bed hungry. He was my entire world, my pride, my hope. Every time he smiled, I felt like I had done something right in life. He was such a gentle boy. When he studied late into the night, I would quietly place a cup of milk beside him. Sometimes he'd look up and say, "Ummi, when I grow up, I'll build you a big house. You'll never have to work again." I'd laugh and say, "I don't need a big house, Beta. I just need your love." And he'd nod, always so sure that nothing could ever come between us. Years passed. Hassan worked hard, finished his studies, and got a good job in the city. When he told me he was moving, my heart ached. But before I could even think of missing him, he said, "Ummi, you're coming with me. I can't leave you behind." So I went with him. We found a small but beautiful house in the city. Quiet, clean, with sunlight in every corner. I spent my mornings making paratas and tea while Hassan read the newspaper before work. Evenings were my favorite. He'd come home, tired but smiling, kiss my forehead and ask, "Ummi, did you rest today?" For a long time, life felt peaceful again. I thought this was my reward after years of struggle. A loving son, a comfortable home, and the joy of seeing him build his own life. Then, one evening, he came home with a young woman beside him. Her name was Sarah. She had bright eyes and a soft smile. When she greeted me, she bent down, touched my feet, and said, "Ummi, I've heard so much about you." Her voice was warm, and in that moment, I felt my heart open to her. I welcomed her like a daughter. I cooked her favorite dishes, gave her my bangles as a blessing, and told Hassan how lucky he was to have found someone like her. They soon got married, and our home filled with laughter again. For a while, it felt like I had gained another child. Sarah would sit with me in the evenings, help me fold clothes, and ask me about Hassan's childhood. She listened with genuine interest, and I would smile, happy to share my memories. I thought to myself, this is how life should be. 2 generations under one roof, living with love and respect. I would often tell my friends, my daughter-in-law is like my own daughter. But slowly, things began to change. It started with small things. Sarah began to spend more time in her room. She stopped joining me for tea in the morning. When I asked if everything was fine, she'd smile politely and say, "Just tired, Ummi." Hassan didn't notice much at first. He was busy with work, often coming home late, but I could feel the distance growing in the house. The warmth that once filled our home began to fade, replaced by quiet dinners and closed doors. Sometimes, when I'd speak to Hassan, He'd answer distractedly, scrolling through his phone. And when I'd ask about something small, like why Sarah didn't eat dinner, he'd sigh and say, Ami, please don't worry about everything. She's just tired. It was such a small sentence, but it cut deep because all my life I had been the one who worried. That's what mothers do. They worry. But now it seemed that even my care was an inconvenience. Still, I told myself it was just an adjustment phase. Every new marriage needs space. I prayed for their happiness, thinking things would soon go back to normal. I started spending more time in the garden, watering my plants, talking to them like old friends. It was my way of filling the silence. Sometimes I'd look at the window and see Sarah standing behind the curtains, talking on the phone quietly. When she noticed me looking, she'd quickly walk away. I didn't want to think badly of her. She was young, from a different generation, maybe just private by nature. But deep down, I felt something shifting, something I couldn't yet understand. There were nights when I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if I unknowingly had done something wrong. Had I said something that hurt her? Had I interfered too much? The mind of a mother never stops searching for blame within herself. One afternoon, while Hassan was at work, I overheard Sarah on the phone. Her tone was soft but serious. She said, I can't live like this anymore. It's like I have no space of my own. I froze in place. Was she talking about me? I didn't want to eavesdrop, but the words stayed with me. The rest of the day, I couldn't eat. I kept replaying those words in my mind, no space of my own. That evening, when Hassan came home, he seemed distant too. He didn't look me in the eyes. At dinner, the table was silent. Sarah barely spoke, and Hassan ate quickly, saying he had work to finish. When they went to their room, I sat alone in the kitchen, staring at the two empty plates. The same kitchen where I once waited for Hassan to come home from school, hungry and smiling. Now, even when he sat just a few feet away, it felt like he was miles from me. I whispered to myself, maybe this is how life changes. Not in storms, but in small, quiet ways. Still, I held on to hope, because that's what mothers do. They keep believing, even when everything around them begins to fade.
The days that followed felt heavy, not because of anything anyone said out loud, but because of all the words that were left unsaid. Silence began to live in our house. It sat between us at the dining table, followed us into the living room, and slept in the spaces where laughter once lived. Sarah no longer asked me how my day was. She no longer joined me for evening tea. Even her footsteps sounded different now, quicker, sharper, as if she didn't want to cross paths with me. At first, I tried to bridge the distance. One morning, I made her favorite breakfast, the one she used to ask for in the early days after her wedding. Parathas with extra butter and a small bowl of mango pickle. When I called her to the table, she came, looked at the food, and said softly, Thank you, Ammi, but I'm on a diet now. I smiled and nodded, pretending it didn't hurt. But as she walked away, I felt the warmth leave the room with her. I sat alone at that table, staring at the untouched plate, wondering when a meal became just a meal and no longer love. Hassan didn't notice much. He was busy with his work, and whenever I tried to talk about how quiet things had become, he'd say, Ammi, she's adjusting. Give her time. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that what I was feeling was just a phase, something that would pass like rain. But the rain never stopped. It just changed its form. Sarah began to rearrange the house. At first, she moved little things, cushions, curtains, photo frames. Then one day, she took down my husband's old photograph from the living room wall. It had been there for more than 20 years. When I saw the empty space where his picture used to hang, I felt my heart sink. I asked her gently, Sara beta, why did you take that photo down? She smiled lightly and said, Oh, Ammi, I'm redecorating. The old frame didn't match the new look. I'll put it somewhere else. But she never did. I found it weeks later, tucked in a drawer, the glass slightly cracked. It wasn't just a photo. It was a memory, a part of me that she quietly put away. I didn't say anything to Hassan. I didn't want to sound petty. He was happy, and I didn't want to bring bitterness into his marriage. But small things like that began to pile up, like dust no one wanted to notice. One evening, Sarah and Hassan invited friends over for dinner. I helped in the kitchen the whole day, chopping vegetables, making biryani, preparing desserts. But when the guests arrived, Sarah introduced everything as if she had cooked it all herself. Hassan smiled proudly at her, saying, Sarah's becoming quite the chef. And everyone clapped, praising her. I stood there, smiling too, though inside, something fragile broke a little more. Later that night, when I was washing the dishes, Sarah came in. She looked at me for a second and said, Ammi, you don't have to do this. I'll handle it. Her words were polite, but her tone carried something else, something that said, You don't belong here anymore. After that evening, I stopped helping as much. I told myself maybe she wanted to manage things her own way, that I should let her. But letting go of the small routines that made me feel useful wasn't easy. I had built my entire life around caring. For my husband once, and for my son always. And now, I didn't know who needed me anymore. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, Hassan began to change too. It was supple, the way he spoke, the way he listened. He still called me Ammi, still asked if I had eaten, but his eyes no longer stayed on me when he spoke. There was a distance even in his warmth. One evening, I overheard a conversation from their room. Hassan's voice was calm but tired. He said, Sarah, she's just old. Please try to understand her. Sarah replied, Hassan, it's not about age. It's about space. I feel like this house isn't mine. Everything reminds me that I'm living in her home. Her words hit me like cold wind. Her home. It was my home, the home I built with love, the one my husband dreamed of, the one where my son grew up. But now, it felt like I was a guest, an extra presence in a story that had moved on without me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching the street lights flicker, and wondered if I had done something wrong. Had I made her feel unwelcome? Had my love somehow become a burden? The next morning, Hassan didn't join me for breakfast. When I asked Sarah, she said, He already ate. I made him something before you woke up. Her tone was simple, but the message behind it wasn't. For the first time, I felt excluded from my own morning, a moment that once belonged only to me and my son. Later that week, Sarah suggested they move the furniture. She said the house felt too crowded. I agreed, trying to stay supportive, but when I returned from my evening walk, I noticed that my sewing table was gone. The corner where I used to sit every evening, stitching and humming softly to myself, was now replaced with a bookshelf and a decorative plant. I asked quietly, Sarah, where's my sewing table? She replied, Oh, Ammi, it didn't fit with the new layout. I moved it to the storage room. You can still use it there. The storage room, a place where old things go when they're no longer needed. I didn't argue. I just nodded, feeling smaller somehow, as if even the walls had started whispering that I didn't belong. Hassan noticed my silence a few days later. He came to me and said, Ami, are you okay? You've been quiet lately. I wanted to tell him everything, how I felt invisible, how I missed our talks, how his wife's coldness was slowly breaking me. But I looked at his tired eyes and simply said, I'm fine, beta. I'm just getting old. He smiled softly and kissed my forehead. Then he left the room. After that, I realized I had become the quiet shadow of my own home. I moved carefully, spoke less, and smiled more just to keep the peace. Every mother learns at some point that love sometimes means swallowing your pain so your child can live in peace. But peace doesn't come easy when your heart feels empty. One Sunday, I decided to make lunch for them. Hassan's favorite dish, chicken korma. I spent the whole morning cooking, humming like I used to. When I finished, I called out to them, Lunch is ready. But no one answered. Their room door was closed. After a few minutes, I knocked softly. Sarah opened the door and said, Oh, Ammi, we already ordered food. Hassan wanted Chinese today. I looked at her, then at the closed door behind her. She smiled politely and added, But thank you for cooking. Maybe we'll eat it later. They never did. That pot of korma stayed untouched until evening when I quietly packed it into small boxes and gave it to the watchman outside. I told myself it was fine, but when I came back inside, the house felt colder than before. Every sound echoed, the ticking clock, the hum of the refrigerator, my own breathing. It was the kind of silence that makes you feel like a stranger in your own life. A few days later, something happened that I will never forget. It was a Sunday afternoon. Hassan was sitting in the living room reading something on his phone. Sarah came and sat beside him, whispering something. He nodded, then looked at me. Ammi, Sarah and I were thinking maybe you should visit Auntie Nasreen for a few weeks. You haven't seen her in so long, right? His voice was calm, but I could feel the weight behind the words. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a polite way of saying, leave. I smiled, pretending not to understand the true meaning. I said, yes, that might be nice. It's been a while. Sarah smiled faintly, almost with relief. That was the moment I knew I was no longer part of their world. That night I sat in my room and looked around at the familiar things. The framed photo of Hassan as a boy, the old clock that still ticked no matter how much time had passed.
I woke up early the morning I was meant to leave. The house was still quiet, wrapped in that soft kind of silence that feels both peaceful and sad. I sat on the edge of my bed, folding the last few clothes into a small suitcase. Every fold carried a memory, a festival, a birthday, a moment of laughter that once made this house feel alive. I thought of Hassan's childhood, how he would run into my arms after school, his bag swinging behind him. I wondered how that same boy could now sit across from me and ask me to visit someone else's home. But I didn't blame him. I told myself, Love changes when life does. People change too. Sarah came to my door that morning. She looked surprised to see me already packed. "Oh, Ami, you're ready. That's nice. Hassan will drop you after breakfast." Her voice was polite, careful, but distant, like she was talking to a guest. I nodded and said, "Yes, Betta, I thought I'd get an early start." She smiled faintly and walked away. I watched her go and wondered if she felt any sadness at all. When Hassan came down, he hugged me lightly. "Ami, it's just for a little while," he said. "You'll rest, meet Auntie Nazreen, and come back fresh." I smiled and answered, "Of course, Betta, just a little while." But deep inside, I already knew. When a mother leaves her home like that, she rarely returns the same way. The car ride was quiet. He talked about work, about how busy he had been, about how Sarah wanted to start something new. I listened, nodding, pretending to care about things that no longer seemed to include me. When we reached Auntie Nazreen's house, he helped me with the bag, kissed my forehead, and said, "Call me if you need anything." Then he drove away before I could even wave properly. Auntie Nazreen welcomed me warmly. She was my late husband's cousin, a kind woman with silver hair and gentle eyes. She made me tea, asked about Hassan, and said, "You must be happy, Amina. Your son has such a lovely wife." I smiled. It was easier to let people believe that than to explain the truth. For the first few days, I tried to relax. I helped Nazreen with small chores, sat in her garden, and tried not to think too much. But every evening, when the sun began to set, I found myself looking at the gate, expecting Hassan to come and take me home. He never did. Days turned into weeks. When I called him, his responses grew shorter. "Ami, I've been busy." "Ami, we'll visit soon." "Ami, Sarah's not feeling well." And each time my heart sank a little more. One evening I finally asked, "Betta, is everything all right? You sound distant these days." There was a pause. Then he said, "Everything's fine, Ami, just Sarah feels you're happier there. She thinks you need your own space." My own space. The words tasted bitter. Was this what they had decided? To give me space by removing me from their lives? That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept turning on the bed, listening to the fan creak above me. Every corner of my mind screamed that something had changed forever. 2 more weeks passed. Still no visit, no call beyond a few rushed minutes. So one morning, I made a decision. I would go home myself. I didn't tell anyone. I took a rickshaw and held my small bag tightly as the city blurred past. My heart pounded like it used to before exams, full of fear and hope together. I told myself that when I reached home, Hassan would smile, Sarah would welcome me, and everything would feel normal again. But life rarely listens to such hopes. When I reached the gate, it was locked. That had never happened before. I rang the bell once, then twice. After a moment, Sarah appeared, surprised and uneasy. "Ami, you're here? You should have called." I smiled nervously. "I missed home. I thought I'd come back." She looked over her shoulder, then back at me. "Actually, Auntie, Hassan isn't home. He's at work. Maybe you could wait at Auntie Nazreen's house? I'll tell him you came." I said softly, "Betta, I'll just sit inside. I won't bother anyone." She hesitated, then finally opened the gate. But her face showed no joy, no welcome, only discomfort. Inside, the house felt unfamiliar. The furniture was different. My sewing machine was gone. Even the smell of my spices had been replaced by something new. Air freshener and perfume. It didn't feel like home anymore. I sat quietly in the corner of the sofa. Sarah offered me tea out of courtesy, but her voice was cold. As I sipped, she kept checking her phone. Finally, she said, "Ami, you really should have called first. Things are a bit hectic these days." I wanted to ask her what had changed, but the words didn't come. Instead, I said, "It's okay. I won't stay long." She nodded, relieved. When Hassan came home that evening, he looked shocked to see me. "Ami, you came without telling me?" "I missed you, Betta," I said quietly. "I thought you'd come to take me home, but you never did." He rubbed his forehead and sighed. "Ami, you know I love you, but Sarah feels uncomfortable sometimes. She thinks you judge her." "Judge her?" I whispered. "Betta, I've never said a word against her." "I know, Ami, but sometimes silence also says things. Maybe she just needs time." He spoke kindly, but I could feel that his heart was no longer with me. There was something in his voice, hesitation, maybe guilt, even fear of choosing sides. That night, I slept in my room again after so long, but it didn't feel the same. The sheets were new, the curtains were different, and even the air seemed distant. I felt like a visitor in my own life. The next morning, Sarah knocked on my door. She said she needed to talk. When I opened the door, she stood there with her arms crossed, her expression calm but cold. "Ami," she said, "I think we should be honest. This arrangement isn't working." I froze. "Arrangement?" She said, "Yes. Living together. It's not healthy. You deserve peace, and so do we. Hassan won't say it because he doesn't want to hurt you, but I know you can see it too." I stared at her, unable to speak. Her words were gentle, but each one landed like a stone. I said softly, "Are you asking me to leave?" She looked away. "I'm asking you to understand." For a long moment, there was only silence. Then I smiled, not because I wanted to, but because it was the only way to stop the tears. I said, "I understand, Betta." When Hassan came home later, I didn't mention our conversation. I didn't want to force him to choose between us. Instead, I cooked dinner, like always, though no one ate much that night. The following week, I quietly began packing again. Hassan noticed and asked, "Ami, are you going somewhere?" I said, "Yes, Betta. I think Sarah is right. I should live with Auntie Mzreen for a while. You both need space." He looked torn, but didn't stop me. He hugged me and said, "It's not forever, Ami." And I smiled again, that same quiet smile I had worn so many times before. The morning I left, the house was bright and calm. Sarah stood by the door, pretending to fix her dupatta. I placed my hand on her head and said, "Take care of my son." She nodded, but her eyes didn't meet mine. Hassan carried my bag to the car. As he placed it in the trunk, I looked at him and said, "Betta, no matter what happens, a mother's door never closes. Remember that." He didn't answer, just nodded and looked away. As the car drove off, I watched the house disappear behind me. The walls, the windows, the memories, all slipping away into distance. I told myself not to cry, but the tears came anyway. They were silent, but they burned. At Auntie Nazreen's, she welcomed me again, but this time she knew something was wrong. She asked, "Did something happen, Amina?" I said, "Nothing that doesn't happen in every home, Nazreen. Just the sound of love changing its tone." Days passed, and I settled into a quiet routine. I cooked for Nazreen, helped her with small chores, but my heart was always elsewhere. Every evening, I'd wait for Hassan's call. Sometimes he'd call briefly, sometimes not at all. And each time the phone stayed silent, I told myself that the first few days after Hassan asked me to leave felt unreal. I stayed at a neighbor's house for a night and then another. Each morning, I would wake up expecting a knock on the door. His knock, the one I had known since he was a child, but it never came. At night, I would close my eyes and replay everything in my mind. Every small word, every look, every silence. I tried to understand where I had gone wrong. Had I interfered too much? Had I misunderstood Sarah's actions? Or was I just an old woman who didn't know when to step aside? I told myself that maybe distance would help. Maybe they needed space. Maybe Hassan would call once things calmed down. So I decided to stay with my cousin in another part of the city for a few weeks. She welcomed me with open arms, though she could see the sadness I was trying to hide. Each morning she would ask softly, "Did he call, Amina?" And I would shake my head and say, "No, not yet." I said it with a small smile, but inside, it hurt like something sharp pressing against my heart. Life without my son felt empty. I had always lived for others, first for my husband, then for Hassan. Now, for the first time, I didn't know who I was living for. The days blended together. I tried to distract myself, cooking, sewing, watering my cousin's plants, but nothing filled the silence that followed me everywhere. I missed the small things most. The sound of Hassan's laughter echoing in the hallway, his habit of leaving the milk on the stove for too long, his way of saying, "Ami, you worry too much." Even his messy handwriting on the shopping list made me smile when I thought about it. Sometimes I caught myself setting an extra plate at the table out of habit, and when I realized what I'd done, I would quietly remove it and wipe my eyes before anyone noticed. Weeks passed, and still there was no word from him. Not a message, not a visit. I wondered if Sarah had truly turned his heart completely away from me. Part of me wanted to believe she hadn't, that she was just young, proud, and insecure, that maybe she didn't know how much her words had hurt. But another part of me whispered that she knew exactly what she had done. One evening, I found an old photo album in my suitcase. It had been packed in a hurry when I left. I sat on the bed, turned on the small lamp, and began to flip through it. There were pictures of Hassan as a child, missing front teeth, scraped knees, big smiles, and then pictures of him growing up, graduating, holding his first paycheck, hugging me tight. On the last page, there was a picture from his wedding day. He was standing next to Sarah, both smiling brightly. I looked at it for a long time, tracing their faces with my finger. That night, I cried quietly, without a sound. A few months later, I received a letter. It wasn't from him. It was from a neighbor, the same kind woman who had seen me leave that day. She wrote that Hassan's house seemed quieter now. She said she had seen Sarah leaving often, alone, looking angry, and that Hassan seemed tired, thinner, more distant than before. I didn't know what to make of it. Part of me felt pity for him. Part of me felt relief that he might be seeing things more clearly. But I didn't let hope rise too high. Hope can be cruel when it isn't ready to bloom. Then, one morning, as I was preparing tea, the phone rang. My hands trembled when I saw the name on the screen. It was him, my Hassan. For a few seconds, I couldn't even answer. My breath caught in my throat. When I finally picked up, my voice cracked. Hassan? There was silence. Then, a soft, broken whisper. Ami. I could hear his breathing, heavy, shaky, full of guilt. I didn't ask questions. I didn't demand answers. I just said, I'm here, beta. He didn't speak for a while. Then he said, Can I come see you? And in that one sentence, all the walls I had built inside me began to crumble. When he arrived later that day, I almost didn't recognize him at first. He looked older, not in years, but in sadness. His eyes were tired, his shoulders heavy. He stood in the doorway, hesitant, like a child who wasn't sure if he was welcome. I opened my arms. He stepped forward, and I hugged him tightly, my tears soaking his shirt. For a long time, neither of us spoke. We just stood there, holding on to what we almost lost. Finally, he whispered, I'm sorry, Ami. Those words were enough. They carried every apology he couldn't put into sentences. I said softly, It's all right. You came back. That's all that matters. We sat together for hours that day. He told me everything, how Sarah had grown distant, how their arguments had increased, how he had realized too late that she had used his love to control him. He said he didn't blame her entirely. Maybe they both made mistakes. But the worst mistake, he said, was turning away from his mother. As he spoke, I listened quietly. I didn't interrupt. I didn't say, I told you so, because I wasn't angry anymore. I was just grateful to hear his voice, to see his face, to know that the bond between us hadn't disappeared, only hidden behind pride and pain. When he finished talking, he took my hands and said, Ami, will you forgive me? I looked at him and smiled through tears. Beta, a mother never needs to forgive her child. Her heart never stopped loving you. That evening, I cooked for him, his favorite dish, just like old times. He ate quietly, like he was tasting home after years of hunger. After dinner, we sat by the window, watching the sunset. The silence between us wasn't heavy anymore. It was peaceful, healing. Before leaving, he said, Can I come see you again tomorrow? I nodded. Of course, beta. My door is always open. Days turned into weeks again, but this time, the visits continued. Hassan came often, sometimes with groceries, sometimes with small gifts. Sometimes he just came to sit silently and drink tea. He didn't speak much about Sarah. I didn't ask. I knew some wounds get time to speak of. One evening, he brought me a small potted plant. He said, I thought you might like this. I smiled. It was a jasmine plant, my favorite. He placed it near the window where the sunlight touched it gently. Every morning after that, I watered it with care. It reminded me that even after a storm, life can bloom again. Months passed. Sarah never called, never came. Hassan told me quietly one evening that she had left him. He didn't go into details, and I didn't press. I could see the hurt in his eyes, the regret in his voice. All I said was, sometimes life gives us pain, so we can learn what love really means. He nodded, tears filling his eyes, and then he said, I understand that now, Ami. Over time, our home felt warm again. Not the same as before. Some things once broken never return exactly as they were. But there was a calmness between us now. We had both changed, both grown. I stopped clinging to the past, and he started cherishing the present. Sometimes when he left for work, I stood by the window and watched him walk away, just like when he was a boy going to school, and I whispered a silent prayer for him that he would never lose himself again in someone else's shadow. I realized something important during those months apart. Love doesn't disappear when it's rejected. It waits quietly, patient and forgiving, like a mother's heart that never...
It has been more than a year now since that painful chapter in my life. Sometimes, when I sit quietly with my cup of tea, I think about how much has changed, not just around me, but inside me. The house feels calmer, gentler, like it finally found its rhythm again. The silence that once felt heavy now feels peaceful, like it belongs here. Hassan visits often. He doesn't stay overnight anymore. His work keeps him busy, but he never forgets to call. Every morning, without fail, I hear his voice on the phone. Ami, have you eaten? Those small words are like a blessing that starts my day. Sometimes, when he comes home for dinner, he still hesitates a little before stepping inside, as if remembering the day I left. I always smile and say, don't just stand there, come in, beta. And then he relaxes, his shoulders drop and the warmth returns. We sit together, talk about simple things, the weather, his office, the jasmine plant that still blooms by the window. Life has become slower, softer, and maybe that's what it was always meant to be, not full of drama or noise, but quiet understanding. In the evenings, when the sun turns golden, I often sit on the balcony with my prayer beads in my hand. The light falls gently on the plants, and the air smells faintly of jasmine and rain. Sometimes I think about the past, about Sarah, about that painful day, about the version of myself who cried in silence, and I wish I could tell her something. I would tell her, you will survive this. You will learn to breathe again. And one day, the pain that feels unbearable now will become your teacher. Because that's what pain does. It teaches us who we are when everything else is taken away. It strips away our pride, our expectations, and shows us what truly matters. For me, what mattered was love. Not the kind that demands or controls, but the kind that waits patiently in the corner of your heart, ready to forgive even when it's been forgotten. Sometimes, I wonder where Sarah is now. I don't ask Hassan about her anymore. Not because I don't care, but because I've made peace with not knowing. If she is happy, I'm glad. If she is not, I pray she finds peace. Because carrying anger only poisons your own heart. And I've learned that forgiveness isn't a gift you give others, it's a gift you give yourself. I still remember her face on that last day. Angry, hurt, lost. And now when I think of her, I don't see her as my enemy. I see her as a young woman who didn't yet understand what love truly meant. Maybe one day she will. Maybe life will teach her, just as it taught me. One afternoon, a few months ago, something unexpected happened. There was a knock on my door. When I opened it, Sarah was standing there. She looked thinner, quieter. Her eyes carried a weight that time hadn't erased. For a moment, we both just stared at each other. Then she said softly, Ami, can I come in? I didn't answer. I simply stepped aside. She walked in, slowly, like someone walking into an old dream. She sat down at the same dining table where we once shared so many meals. The silence between us was heavy, but not hostile. It was the silence of two people who had both suffered enough to finally understand each other. After a while, she said, "I wanted to say sorry." Her voice trembled. "I didn't understand back then. I thought you were trying to control everything. I thought Hassan's love for you meant there was less for me. I was wrong." I looked at her, and for the first time, I saw not the woman who broke my heart, but the girl who never learned what a mother's love feels like. I said quietly, "We all make mistakes when we're scared. But the good thing about mistakes is that we can grow from them." She started to cry. She said, "I hurt you, and I hurt him. I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed to say it." I reached across the table and took her hand. Her fingers were cold, trembling. I told her, "Forgiveness isn't something you have to earn. It's something we give because our hearts need peace." She nodded, wiping her tears. We sat like that for a long time. No anger, no blame. Just two women finally letting go of everything that once stood between them. Before leaving, she said, "Thank you, Ammi." I smiled faintly and replied, "Take care of yourself, beta." And for the first time, I meant it with no pain attached. After she left, I stood by the window for a while watching her walk away. The evening sun touched her hair, and for a brief moment it felt like closure. Not a perfect ending, but a peaceful one. Sometimes that's all we need, not to erase the past, but to understand it. When Hassan came over that night, I told him she had visited. He looked surprised and then quiet. After a few moments, he said softly, "Maybe that's what we both needed." I nodded. Yes, maybe that was exactly what we needed. To forgive, to release, to begin again. Now, every time I water the jasmine plant, I think about how much life changes. Once I thought I couldn't survive without my son beside me. Then I learned to stand alone. Once I thought betrayal would destroy me. Then I learned that even in betrayal, there are lessons about love. If there's one thing this journey taught me, it's that love and pain are not enemies. They live together, side by side. You cannot know the depth of love without understanding the ache of loss. And you cannot truly forgive until your heart has learned to let go of what it expected. Sometimes, at night, I walk through the house. It's quiet now, just the soft ticking of the clock and the distant hum of the city outside. I stop by Hassan's old room. His childhood drawings still hang on the wall. I touch one of them gently, smiling through tears. I think about the woman I used to be, the one who believed she had to hold everything together to feel loved. Now I know love doesn't need control. It only needs presence. And even when people leave, love doesn't. It stays with you in the way you speak, in the way you forgive, in the way you hope again. Sometimes neighbors ask me, "Amina, how did you forgive them after all that happened?" And I tell them, because carrying pain is heavier than letting it go. I don't say that forgiveness is easy. It's not. It takes time. It takes tears. It takes nights of questioning yourself and days of silence that feel endless. But when forgiveness finally comes, it feels like sunlight after a long storm. Forgiving doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering without bitterness. It means saying, "Yes, it happened and it hurt, but it no longer controls who I am." If someone listening to my story is going through something similar, if your heart is broken, if someone you love has turned away, I want you to know this. You are still whole. Even when they walk away, you are not empty. Even when they stop calling, you are not unloved. Love doesn't end because someone forgets it. It changes shape. Sometimes it becomes quiet strength. Sometimes it becomes wisdom. And sometimes it just becomes a prayer you whisper for the ones who hurt you.
As for me, I've learned to live with grace. I wake up every morning, thank God for another day, make my tea, and open the window to let in the light. The world feels softer now, not because it changed, but because I did. Every heartache, every silence, every goodbye taught me something. And now when I look back, I don't see a story of betrayal anymore. I see a story of love, loss, and the quiet power of forgiveness. So, this is my story, the story of a mother, a son, and a lesson life wanted me to learn, that love is not about possession, it's about patience. It's not about always being right, it's about being kind, even when you have every reason not to be. When you choose love over anger, you don't lose, you heal. And when you choose forgiveness, you find peace that no one can take away. Tonight, before I sleep, I'll say my prayers like I always do. I'll thank God for giving me a heart that still feels, still hopes, still forgives. And I'll whisper one last line. For every pain I carried, you gave me wisdom. For every tear I shed, you gave me peace. Then I'll close my eyes, knowing that the day my daughter-in-law turned my son against me was not the day my life ended. It was the day I began to understand what true love really means.